Hi, this is Tim Calling, coming at you from Senior Leads Boost with another Tips Tuesday video. The topic for today's tip is disaster planning for your website. What will you do when your website hosting fails, when your website crashes because the website host that you're using suddenly fails and stops serving the files that make up your website, or in fact loses them catastrophically? What will you do? How can you prevent it, and what is the solution? Well, first of all, let's take a look at what are the sources of potential website hosting failures. There's actually quite a few, but here's some of the top ones. First of all, individual hosting server failures. In other words, the machine, the physical hosting computer that your your website is on, simply crashes and fails. It either dies or there's a power failure. Now, this could happen in a server farm. That's very common, data center, where there are hundreds or thousands even of servers. But this is a case where it's your individual server that fails. There are also, number two, cases where your website stops working because the entire data center with all of the servers in it either loses power or it loses its connection to the internet. That can happen. And there's other reasons as well, of course. Other ones that are a little bit easier to solve usually include things like taking an update to your website technologies, technical update, which turns out to be a bad one. So, how can you either reduce the likelihood or mitigate these failures? Well, first of all, and this will sound self-serving, but seriously, one way to reduce the risk of this is to make sure you don't try to go cheap. When you go cheap, in other words, when you try to get hosting, I'm not talking about the website itself, but the service that it's running on. If you go someplace that is really inexpensive, like $1 a month or something ridiculous like that, some cheesy hosting service, and that includes, oh gosh, Gator, HostGator, or A2, or GoDaddy, or any of those, you're going to get what you pay for. It usually means less reliable. It usually means little or no support or bad support. A lot of times, depending on who you get the good fortune to talk to or the bad fortune, you may get bad advice. One of the biggest problems too is it means very often that either there's no backup done whatsoever, or the backup files that are created simply are corrupt or ineffective. They cannot be restored. And that's a big disaster because you might lose your entire website if that happens. Another way so number one, don't go cheap on your hosting. Number two, keep all of the technical components of your website up to date. If you're using WordPress for your website construction, which is very possible because WordPress is used for over 3/4 of the websites in the internet these days. It turns out that that's actually made up of a stack of different technologies. There's WordPress itself, there's the theme that you're using, there's all of the plugins that you're using, and so forth. All of those are subject to having to be updated for technical improvements, or very often for security reasons, or sometimes they have to be updated because another part of the technical stack was updated. So if you keep all of those up to date, number one, but also number two, if you carefully test when you do so, that's a good way to help to make sure that your website will not experience a failure. Finally, probably the most important one, even though it's kind of a scorched earth or a last resort approach, is to make sure, absolutely sure, that you, number one, have good backups, frequent backups, and multiple locations for your backups, meaning have backups that run, as far as frequency, at least daily, and maybe even hourly in some cases, Number two, make sure that they run and store the backup files not only on the local server itself, but also on servers that are somewhere else. For example, for our clients, we use a service called Blog Vault that we pay a lot of money for that stores our backup files in a completely separate location. We also actually store them in another separate location ourselves, and then we also store hourly backup files right on the server, the same server as the website. So what's the point of that? Well, number one, having multiple locations helps to ensure that even if one becomes corrupt and it cannot be restored, that one in another location will be non-corrupt and will be able to be restored. The reason for having frequent ones is that things change on websites over time. In most cases, honestly, most websites don't change hour to hour or minute to minute because most websites are not e-commerce websites where there are transactions going. Many times they are not doing other sorts of non-monetary transactions. Like many times they are not presenting online classes. But there are many cases where websites do have minute-to-minute or even second-to-second transactions going on, either purchase, sale transactions, or user interactions that need to be stored successfully. And the trick with those is that if you have a catastrophic failure of your website, and you have one of those websites, then having a backup from an hour ago will help you, but it'll lose everything that happened since that last backup took place. For cases like that, we actually happen to use a special version of Blog Vault, which basically can restore transactions up to the last minute. And so if you have an e-commerce site and it's not being backed up that way, or an online learning site, or a membership site, and it's not being backed up literally real time like that, then you might want to reconsider your hosting. All right, so that's it. So these are the most important suggestions that we have. There are many other things that we could recommend, but don't go cheap. Keep all the technical components up to date and have multiple backups in multiple locations. I hope this has been helpful. We pride ourselves on doing a great job of hosting websites for clients, building and hosting websites. We have our own servers that we manage very carefully, and we'd love to have you as a client for any aspect of your website needs. Please reach out to us. Here is our contact information, and you will see it also in the end roll at the end of this video. Thank you very much. I hope this has been helpful. Have a good week.